Elon Musk hoped that donning the symbolic Wisconsin cheesehead would help the conservative judge win the race for a coveted seat on the state Supreme Court. He even wrote million-dollar checks to voters and insisted the contest would decide the future of America and Western civilization because it would uphold President Trump's agenda. But for all his cash and hyperbole, he failed.
I never could have imagined that I'd be taking on the richest man in the world, and we won!
Musk and groups tied to him spent $25 million on the race, helping to make it the most expensive judicial contest in American history. But the Democratic candidate successfully billed it as a referendum on his and Trump's first months in office.
All right, Wisconsin, we did it!
And voters gave their resounding verdict, a 10-point victory for the Democrat.
He's just a pushy billionaire, and he's cutting everything. The people need these things he's cutting.
He just makes me very angry. He uses money in ways that we're not used to. You know, he should just stay out of local politics. He should stay out of all politics, frankly.
And then to Florida, where 2 by-elections for seats in Congress provided another litmus test for Trump's presidency so far. And yes, in these ruby-red districts, the Republicans were always going to win. But even here, the Democrats showed some resistance, sharply shrinking the margins of Trump's hand-picked candidates.
What we saw today was the best kind of win.
But the freshly elected Republican congressman didn't care about the margins, just the win, and who he'd won it for.
Mr. President, this win is yours, far more than it is mine.
There's an air of jubilation in the room. The Republican candidate has just been declared the winner. But if this special election here in Florida was a referendum on Donald Trump and his policies, then the margin of victory was much smaller than the Republicans were hoping for. So does this tell us anything about the way voters are feeling about Donald Trump 2.5 months on?
The margin of victory doesn't reflect any kind of less support for President Trump.
You don't think anything about the smaller margins, any sense of disquiet about Donald Trump's policies?
No. We know where to spend our money wisely, and a win is a win.
And for this Trump superfan, the Republican win was validation of everything the president has done so far.
I wake up every day with my hair on fire. I'm so excited. I have my cup of coffee and I watch TV to see what did he do while I was asleep. What wonderful things are happening. I wake up with a lighter heart every day.
She and they believe that what the president is about to do today will be another big win for Team Trump. A sweeping package of tariffs that Trump hopes will kick the American economy into high gear. And at Florida's famous Daytona Speedway, some drivers at a charity event were only too happy to defend the move. Are you worried about the impact of tariffs on the economy because it's ultimately higher prices for Americans?
As Donald Trump always says, America first. So the tariffs are there to promote from within, so American goods, American workers, American jobs. And that's the point of it. It's not a point to punish people, it's a point to promote America first.
This driver says he's already been hurt by tariffs on cars he imported from Germany, but says the tariffs and Trump's mass layoffs are exactly what's needed.
The bureaucracy kills everything as far as efficiency goes. Trim the fat. You have to run this country like a company.
It's what Elon Musk is doing. Do you find that offensive at all? People find him and the way he's slashing.
Not at all.
But others do find it offensive.
It's still the American consumer who's going to be paying the price for all this, while, unfortunately, I hate to say, the billionaires and the inside people make the money and take the cream off the top.
Perhaps no surprise that Donald Trump has reportedly told his cabinet today that Mr. Musk will be stepping back in the coming weeks, taking his foot off the gas in his role as government hatchet man to go back to doing what he does best: cars and rockets.
Well, Elon Musk did say last week that he would be stepping aside after about 130 days into the administration. So that would be, anyway, about the end of May. But the fact that Donald Trump reportedly has had to reassure his cabinet today that Musk would be stepping aside today, especially after the Wisconsin loss last night, tells you that Musk is increasingly being seen as a political liability by members of the cabinet, because the Liberal judge in Wisconsin last night, she didn't just win despite Musk's influence and all his money. She won decisively, and that has senators feeling very queasy about his influence, as they are feeling queasy, some of them at least, about Trump's big announcement on tariffs today, because they are worried that it will impact the American economy and jobs going forward. We still know very few details about the tariffs, I have to say, other than that Trump will announce it with big fanfare in the Rose Garden, surrounded by his cabinet members in about 2 hours' time, that they will kick in today, and that the UK is not exempt.
Siobhan Kennedy in Florida. Well, here, Sir Keir Starmer told MPs he was preparing for all eventualities. But what impact could tariffs have on the British economy? Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster.
Well, the British government, supposedly America's closest ally, we're often told, like everyone else, is in the dark. Unless there's a courtesy call happening as we speak, all the indications all day from government sources have been that the government will be glued to the television like everybody else, waiting to hear exactly what the president says for the first time, hearing it at 9 o'clock. What some people around government are saying is that what they're particularly hoping for from this announcement, apart from the numbers, obviously, which they hope will be low and not too punishing for Britain, is clarity. They're not sure they'll get it. There's a worry that this decision-making process in the Trump government is so chaotic that there might not be a clear document afterwards. There might not be a link you can click onto. So individual countries, individual sectors, if it's banded like that, know exactly what they're in for. They're also hoping in government that the tit-for-tat retaliation which is expected from some countries and organisations like the EU, that doesn't escalate again, and that the retaliatory tariffs from the EU, for instance, don't then attract another tariff from President Trump in a sort of arms race. There is enormous pressure, you sense, on Keir Starmer to say something beyond what he's said so far on retaliation. And that message was being repeated in Prime Minister's questions today. We're calm and pragmatic. We shouldn't jump in and just move to retaliatory tariffs. There's a strong indication in government they don't want to move to retaliatory tariffs. They buy the analysis of the Office for Budget Responsibility, which last week said that bringing in retaliatory tariffs would be self-harming for Britain. They do buy into all of that, but at the same time, you hear Keir Starmer saying, as he did in question time, we rule nothing out. After the announcement, Britain will hope to pick up this separate, discrete negotiation with America to try and get a mini trade deal, but they're pretty sure that tariffs will probably be part of our lives here. Steel, cars, potentially carrying on whatever that deal agrees, and part of the global economy.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster. Well, our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is with me. Helia.
Well, Chris, listen, if it's country or industry, what Donald Trump announces tonight could represent the most punitive trade restrictions the US has announced in 100 years. You'd have to go back all the way to the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930 to see anything similar. Back then, US lawmakers were trying to protect American farmers, but instead they raised prices for US consumers, created anxiety in the stock market, and intensified the Great Depression.
So what happens in Britain with the government pretty much ruling out retaliation?
As Gary was saying, look, the UK is a trading nation. At the moment, more than 2/3 of our GDP is actually trade. And what the OBR said very distinctly last week was that if you had the worst case scenario where you get these 20% tariffs, well, almost 0.5% will be knocked off the UK economy. But if the British government retaliates, it's even worse. If we go after Boeing, Heinz, Kellogg's, then prices for UK consumers will edge up and the impacts will be even worse, wiping off nearly a percentage point from growth. So that is why, as Gary was saying, you're seeing the UK government act relatively passively. But all of this, Krish, is about physical goods, which is what President Trump is obsessed with, which is strange because actually the US economy has transformed from a manufacturing nation to a services superpower.
So it's services where it would make sense to retaliate?
Well, I think that's what you're starting to hear about. Maybe that's the EU kind of baring its teeth ahead of a deal. You can see that the EU imports 774 billion euros from the US, but more than half of that is services. Google, Facebook, Amazon, these companies have had monopolies for over 2 decades.
Finally, what about Tesla?
Oh, it's rather interesting, isn't it? Because they could be in the firing line for very explicit tariffs. The EU is very good at rule tweaking, as Britain well knows, and Tesla could see tariffs raised. You know, Elon Musk has seen its Tesla share price crash 40% since its peak. It went down today after sales were down 13% compared to last year. Then miraculously, Krish, the share price seemed to recover as those rumours started to emerge that Elon Musk was leaving the White House. And that shows you that sometimes economics and politics just don't mix.
Thanks, Helia. So how should the rest of the world react to Trump's tariffs? Coming up, we get the view from the 2 other biggest trading blocs in the world, the EU from Brussels and China from Beijing. But first, let's go to Westminster, where we're joined by the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, who's calling for an economic coalition of the willing to stand up against Trump. But if it's clear, as the Office for Budget Responsibility says, that it's going to cost more to the British economy to enter into retaliation, why are you suggesting it?
Well, I believe in free trade, and I think working with others is the best way to defend free trade. Look, Krish, I said to the Prime Minister at question time today that I admire the way he'd got together a military coalition of the willing to deal with Putin, but now we did need an economic coalition of the willing. That obviously would be our European partners, but our Commonwealth partners like Canada and indeed others around the world. And if we don't stand up for free trade now, there's a danger we'll lose free trade for a generation.
But it's just
so
self-harm,
we have to take this
isn't
seriously.
it?
Sorry?
It's just self-harm. I mean, it's posturing that would harm the British economy more than not retaliating.
No, I'm afraid sometimes to defend free trade, you've got to fight for free trade. And here's another thing that Liberal Democrats are arguing for. Let's tell the White House we have alternatives. Let's have a UK-EU customs union to boost our trade with our European partners. Let's do a trade deal with Canada. You know, we need to show that we have alternatives. That is probably part of the strategy that an economic coalition of the willing would deploy. So it's not just about retaliatory tariffs. I understand that, and that may be part of it.
But you don't have an answer for that, do you? I mean, that this is actually more damaging to the British consumer and the British economy. It would leave the government with less money to spend. It would probably lead to cuts in government spending. For what? To take on the biggest economy in the world and our biggest single trading partner. We couldn't possibly win that war.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. We're already suffering from tariffs from Donald Trump. There's a suggestion that maybe the new tariffs that he puts on Britain won't be quite as high as elsewhere. It's hardly a big victory. Now is the moment to try to get rid of these tariffs and this threat of tariffs to the British economy, to the European economy and to the world economy by standing with our allies elsewhere in the world.
What would be your threat to Donald Trump that would make him back down?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
What would be your threat to Donald Trump? What would you threaten to tariff and at what level?
Well, one would try to work with our colleagues on that, but here's one that I've already said. Let's put tariffs on Teslas. Let's look at the tech bros. I mean, I'm told, you probably heard this yourself, Krish, that number 10 and in the talks they've discussed about cutting the digital services tax, which is a tax paid by very largest 20 multinationals in the tech industry, mostly American. It's a very modest tax. They've had a monopoly for ages. And the idea that we would give up that tax on these hugely wealthy people, including, of course, Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, at the same time where we're cutting aid to the poorest in our world and welfare benefits in the UK, that would be, I think, unthinkable. So the problem when you deal with someone like Donald Trump is he is an unreliable ally. He signs a deal and then reneges on it.
Yeah.
I mean, just the
I'm
other
sure
day...
everyone will agree with that, but so far you're just coming up with a Tesla tariff. That is not going to make Donald Trump back down. You'd need to go much, much bigger than that. And that would be very, very costly.
I'm sorry, I am going much bigger than that. I have to come back to you on that. I'm the one, Liberal Democrats are the ones calling for an economic coalition of the willing round the world. That's big. We'd have an economy much bigger than the United States if we all got people around the same table, as Liberal Democrats are arguing for. And we'd not just be talking about tariffs back on the US, we'd be talking about increasing free trade amongst ourselves. One very easy option would be a UK-EU customs union. So what we're talking about is very much a positive-sum game to defend free trade, yes, but also to go further on free trade. The Conservatives very much damaged our economy with their costly red tape with the customs union and pulling us out of the single market and so on. There's a chance for us to rebuild that trading relationship, rebuild that growth, that economic
We'll come
strength.
to that another time. But Ed Davey, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, the German MEP Anna Cavazzini is chair of the European Parliament's Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee, and she's going to be talking to Kathy right now.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, she joins us from Strasbourg. Anna Cavazzini, just wondering what you can do as a bloc to target, really to maximise the political pain to the US, but minimise the economic pain to the EU. What would you recommend there?
You mentioned it. I think it's really important to cause some economic pain to the US in order to force Trump to change his course. And I think partially we see already some results. You know, the stock market is going downhill. A lot of American companies are speaking out against the tariffs because they see the bad results. So I think if we make it possible to target really Trump's voters bases or companies that are supporting Trump and make it very costly for him to continue with his course, we might be able to succeed and get him back to the negotiation table. And of course, at the same time, we have to make sure... Yeah, so far the EU was putting forward, very targeted counter tariffs on, stuff like bourbon or jeans in order to retaliate. But I think now with the escalation that we're seeing today from Trump's side, that he will probably announce tariffs on all goods from all countries in the world. Then I think we need a bigger response. And indeed, one option could be a digital services tax that also some EU member states anyhow have already put forward, but more member states could follow.
But it's interesting, there's a real divergence with the UK on this because the UK is trying to curry favour with the US administration by promising to reduce the digital services tax. You, in the EU, you want to escalate this.
Yeah, of course, every country can decide on themselves, but I would say... and we tried to negotiate as European Union also with Trump. Of course, we tried to have a cooperative approach. We tried to have a deal with him, but so far he's not ready to deal with us. So I think he is only understanding the language of strength. And we also see that a lot of tech companies are supporting Trump. So I think we need to have a leverage in order to deal with him and not just give in and try to have a deal with them, because this will just not work. So I really also hope that Great Britain joins forces, works very closely with the European Union, with other allies in the world, like with Canada or whatever, South Korea, Japan, in order to be sure that we have a broad coalition against this very disastrous economic policy that Trump is leading.
But this is an escalation. You confirm that, and you think that's what needs to happen?
Yes, Trump is escalating, and I think...
No, the EU is escalating if you do the digital services tax.
No, yeah, Trump is escalating in putting tariffs forward that are not rightful, that are not just. Trump is escalating, and we need to have a response that is working in order to make sure that we are getting back to the fair system that we had before, and that we are not destroying millions of jobs on both sides of the Atlantics just because Trump has a mood or thinks this is the right thing to do, to just go against any global agreements. I think this is what you call escalation, not our reaction.
Right. There is talk of the EU invoking anti-coercion regulations, what's been nicknamed the trade bazooka. What would that look like? Do you advocate that too?
Yeah, we have indeed this instrument in the European Union that was never used, but it was created and designed for a case like when the EU is economically blackmailed. And I think what we probably see today could count as such a situation. So the EU can basically restrict access from, let's say, American companies, banks, or financial companies, insurance companies, to the EU market, or put levies in place in order to raise more money. And I think this is definitely on the table. I think at the moment, all instruments that we have are on the table, and we need to use them smartly.
You're going to chuck everything at it. Anna Cavazzini, thank you very much for joining us. Now back to Krish in London.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, China has so far been the main target for Mr. Trump's tariffs and has responded with their own. A little earlier, I spoke to Victor Gao from the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing and a former translator for the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. I asked how he thought the world should respond to American tariffs.
Well, I don't think anything really will work in the short term against the Trump administration. But I think by doing the right thing and sending the right message is extremely important. Tariffs are not going to work in any real sense of the word. No country in the world will make huge riches and wealth by imposing tariffs against other countries. We are living in a highly integrated world, and trade should be very much welcomed and encouraged between and among nations, rather than using tariff to force other nations to invest in your own country.
Is there also a danger, though, that Europe will feel that in order to protect itself, it also has to raise tariffs against China?
We should really deal with each other as equals and as partners, and we need to sign up this comprehensive agreement of investment as soon as possible. And Europe should really walk a very fine distance between Washington and Beijing and really see China as it is. China is not a competitor of Europe. China can be a very good partner with Europe, overcoming many problems, especially the headwind created by Washington.
To what extent do you think Donald Trump offers China both a political and economic opportunity?
We need to deal with President Trump as he is and try our best to stabilize the China-US relations, to avoid any significant escalation of tensions between the two countries, and definitely do our best to avoid any war or direct confrontation between the two countries, and try to use dialogue and diplomacy to solve all the problems. But at the same time, China definitely will stand very firm and will never give a single inch to the manhandling and the pressure from the Trump administration.
But are there more opportunities for you now in the Pacific and Africa as a result of America looking less reliable?
China has been promoting the Belt and Road Initiative and also the Global Civilization Initiative. These very important initiatives should be further promoted with or without the United States participation, or with or without the United States second-guessing.
It's been clear, though, since day one of the Trump administration that their foreign policy is at least partly based on their belief that China is going to take military action in Taiwan. Do you believe there's going to be military action in Taiwan?
Well, there is only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. From the Chinese perspective, we prefer peaceful reunification. But reunification is the megatrend. Sooner or later, it will take place. Preferably, it will take place in peaceful ways. But if the separatists want to push the situation beyond the point of return, or if any foreign country, including the United States, really wants to involve in the cross-strait relations by military means or other means, then China will take military action.
Yes, I mean, that sounds like a yes, that there is going to be military action, because it's not just the Taiwanese political leaders, it's the people there too.
I don't think so. I think the overwhelming majority of the people in Taiwan, altogether 23 million of them, do not want to have a war, do not want to fight for the separatism of Taiwan. They consider themselves to be part of the whole Chinese nation.
No, but they believe there's going to be a Chinese invasion. They don't want war, but they believe you're coming for them.
Well, if it happens, it will not be an invasion, it will be a reunification.
And do you think Donald Trump makes it easier for you to do that? When you look at the way he is giving Russia what it wants in Ukraine, do you think, well, actually, when it comes to it, he doesn't want war?
Well, I would say, whether you like him or not, President Trump probably will be one of the most realistic and very pragmatic person in the world of today. He knows who has the strengths and what is the right thing to do. For example, he knows that Taiwan has no cards to play against China. No country in the world can recognize both China and Taiwan at the same time.
Victor Gao, thank you very much.
Thank you.